Today we're going to check out these octave shapes and the idea of dividing an octave in various ways. So on this first example, we're going to divide the octave in half. But let's start with playing some octave shapes. So these are just really important things to check out and play. So there's the interval of the octave. We can apply these to root notes of chords or different things, but basically get a little bit of a framework for whatever we're doing. So this is a good example. You could work on various intervals. You could work on scales, arpeggios, and things. But in this talk, we're going to just take some select kinds of note collections, you might say, and just kind of get a sense for dividing the octave here. So let's say we've done this talk, okay, where we had this root note on string 2, fret 1, and then string 13, string 2, fret 13, string 2, fret 1. All right, and so let's say we have a note right in the middle here. I think I'm gonna add it like this. All right, so we're finding kind of the spaces halfway in between. So that tone there, we can call it a sharp 11 or a flat 5 when we're spelling out chord sounds. But just kind of the point of this is noticing that it's halfway, right? So if we have 12 tones, right, before we get to the octave, then our halfway point there is going to be F sharp. Now, because the frets are spaced differently as you go up, so closer together as you move towards the bridge, it doesn't seem like halfway, but in the musical sense, it's the halfway point. All right. So then when we go over these octave shapes and kind of look around, you might even go up in that kind of direction there. Oop, right there, rather. Okay. Create a little bit of a diagonal of across the neck. Okay, so what we're working with here is this concept of creating just a little bit of a limitation by saying we're going to try to space these notes out as far from each other as possible, and that single string will really illustrate that. So sticking with the second string here, what if we try to fit in a couple of notes? And we try to distance them as far apart from one another as we can. Now let's think about numbers. It's a little bit of math here, I guess. Um, if you have 12 notes, then it's it's not so hard to um, divide certain numbers. So dividing by 2, right? And then you say, okay, well, we're starting here, dividing by 2. Okay, so we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and then so that's the tritone. And then from this number, 6 would be okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would get us back to the root an octave higher from where we started. So we can say, okay, it's divisible by 2. So that's where we get um, this halfway point, right? That tritone. Now, when we have it 3 ways, basically, um, then well, we know 3 is divisible by 12. So starting here again, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we get a major third above the root. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, a major third above the third. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, a major third above that. So then we've divided the octave up sort of evenly, right? So with this particular shape, we have the augmented triad, and so with this sort of um, kind of symmetry, we have these interesting patterns on the guitar neck. So okay, where you know when you have, let's say, and we'll see this later, when you have a pentatonic scale um, or a major scale heptatonic type scale or something that has 5 notes or 7 notes, it's not divisible by 12 evenly. So then you can you the pattern is much longer. You might say it's the whole 12 frets before it's going to repeat. But with these tritone type intervals and the augmented triad, we kind of could see that it's sort of pattern appears to repeat more often, right? So with these augmented triads, we're starting there. Let's say open string, and then 4th fret, and then 8th fret, and so I'm really using that same shape, going down string by string. So the pattern is repeating more frequently. All right, so let's go ahead and identify. So if we're thinking about a C chord, for example, then we might call this the third, major third, and then the say the sharp 5, or uh, especially as far as in the context of a triad, that would make sense there. Okay. So let's see if we can keep going. So we divided things in half. We divided the octave 3 ways. So both 2 and 3, of course, divisible by 12. So now if we think about dividing things 4 ways, then we get diminished 7 arpeggio. So notice here, I'm starting on this note. If I go, so this is basically 0, right? So there's a 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now if I go 3 up from there, 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, and then we're back on the octave shape. So we've divided things up, and every note is sitting as far as possible from the other notes. Okay, so we can say, okay, yeah, that's gonna be the root note, the flat third, flat fifth, and I'm gonna call that double flat 7 there. Okay. So there's the diminished arpeggio, and we can see that the patterns are again repeating fairly frequently, you might say. So if I choose two, let's say 2 notes per string, then we're just kind of moving up there. But visually, we could see that same tritone sitting apart from another tritone group, you might say. So if we go back and think a little bit about that tritone, and then what we're basically doing is having, this is another perspective on it, but basically placing a tritone, another tritone grouping halfway in between. Okay, so we get this diminished 7 arpeggio, and this will come up again when we talk about the octatonic scale. Change picks here. All right, so illustrating this on the one string is really helpful, right? Because seeing the entire patterns can be a lot to take in. All right, so far we've had two notes, of course, divisible by 12, or 12 is divisible by 2, 12 is divisible by 3, 12 is divisible by 4. Now we get to 5. So 5 is not gonna work out evenly here. So what we're gonna do is work with that same concept of trying to keep things spaced apart as much as possible. So we're going to have some instances where there are whole steps and some instances where there are minor thirds. So you can imagine that these tones are kind of repelling one another, right? Or just kind of just wanting a little bit of space, you might say. So as we walk up here, we say, okay, and I'll mention too that there are a lot of different, um, quite a few different options, and I've done some talks on these pentatonics, and what others would follow the same type of concept. So, for example, minor pentatonic, which is a mode of this major pentatonic, and or any of the modes of this, and also dominant pentatonic or the minor sixth pentatonic. All right, so here we have the root. Call it 2, 3, 5, 6, and then back to the root. So with 5 tones, we get a different kind of spacing. Some are whole steps, some are minor thirds. All right, and then we can see this familiar shape of the pentatonic, really familiar to a lot of guitarists, anyway. And we can, really think about these root notes and octave shapes and how this all kind of works. So just a reminder about all this. So we are trying to divide the octave up into smaller and smaller parts, basically, or just have more notes in there. And the other kind of constraint is that we're trying to keep these an equal distance. Well, not even so much equal distance, but have them have as much space as they can fit in. So notice if I were to move, so the fifth has a little more space on the lower end from the third, so it has 2 frets in between and 1 fret, or 2 frets above, 1 fret in between. So we have a larger interval here. We have fifth down to the third is a minor third. Fifth down up to 6 is a whole step. Okay. So then we say, okay, well, what if we push that down a half step? So the third to the sharp 11 now, or flat 5, and sharp 11 up to the 6. So that's a minor third now. Right. So we could do that same thing with the 6 too. So we could say, oh, let's bump that up a half step, because it's the 6 to the root is a minor third, where 6 to the 5th is a whole step. Maybe bump that up. So whole step to the root, minor third down to the 5th. So you can see whatever we do when we have 5 notes total, we can't really arrive at a symmetry or something that is a mirror image even, or anything like that. And so it's not, can't divide 12 by that number. So, all right. So then we get to 6, right? And just like 2, and 3 and 4, does divide up and we see this really, it's really kind of plain to see that, this is the whole tone scale. There are other 6-note scales, sure, other ones that are also symmetric like this, but we're just coming up with one example for each, and trying to space these notes out as far as they can go. But you can really see how these are all just 2 frets apart, or whole step, and they're all, kind of like the augmented triad and the diminished 7 arpeggio. There's a kind of a limited number of these, right? So if we were to go back and look at the augmented triad, right, we have 3 more in addition to this one, so 4 total augmented triads, because all the inversions are identical to the root position. So you could call this C augmented triad, or A flat augmented triad, or E augmented triad. So similar to with the diminished 7 arpeggio. In addition to this one, we have 2 others, so the 3 total. So same idea, the inversions of this are all the same because we have this symmetry about it. And so, we could call this by any of the root names: C diminished 7, E flat diminished 7, G flat diminished 7, A diminished 7. Okay. And then when we get to, of course, the pentatonic, just reviewing all these, then this is the C major pentatonic, and it's unique. It's its own thing, and since it doesn't have that quality to it, um, then we say, well, that whether there are 12 of these. So when we get to the whole tone scale, we can say, well, there are 2 of these, right? Because just like the same concept as before, you could think of this in terms of inversions, just be a lot of them, but they're all the same. So, you could call this C whole tone scale, D whole tone scale, E whole tone scale, F sharp whole tone scale, A flat whole tone scale, D flat, or B flat rather, whole tone scale. So whatever, perspective you have on it. So, it's kind of interesting too, if it kind of took a shape out of here. You could choose any shape and move it by whole steps. Same thing with the diminished, which, except that you would move it up 3 frets and augmented and all that. All right, so here we have the opportunity to have everybody have an equal, or every note to have an equal amount of space, so they can each have a fret on each side of them. Right, and everybody has the same amount of space on each side. So All right, so if we're spelling out a chord, someone might say, okay, root 2, 3, sharp 11, flat 13, flat 7, and the root. Flat 13 could be called a sharp 5. Sharp 11 could be called a flat 5. Okay, so there we get the whole tone scale. All right. So now we get into 7 tones. And so again, having everything sit in between or divide up evenly through 12 is not going to happen. So so we get this 7-note scale where some of the notes sit next to others by half step, while others have a whole step on either side, and then there's other ones with the half step, whole step on whichever side. So this is a C major scale. We can say, okay, root note. I wonder how that happened. So I wanted these to be empty. So if you're listening on the podcast, do have some visuals here for the YouTube members. If you want to check that out, there. There we go. Okay, when this started happening. All right, so we get whole step, and then a half step. Whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So notice again, if we move this, move one of these notes that has a half step, they're going to have a half step on the opposite side. Move that over there. So it's sort of interesting to do that because you could get different key signatures maybe, or basically modes of the melodic minor, depending on how you end up doing it. So we'll say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root note again. All right, and then so we have all these tones up here in pattern. So this is a pattern that will repeat every 12 frets, right? It's interesting too to think about you know, the amount of usage of certain collections of notes. So 7 notes, that seems to be in the history of say Western music, and I would say likely other traditions as well. But it's interesting, you know, this 7, it's sort of lacks this symmetry to it, and it just doesn't divide it evenly by the octave. So I'm not sure what conclusions can be drawn from that, but I'm just gonna leave it at just sort of interesting. The pentatonic scales too. So that's another very common um, scale in many musical traditions. So um, that's another one where it's not really possible to divide it by the octave evenly. So although maybe you could with microtonal sort of things, but anyway, and sort of I think a typical situation we have this pentatonics and heptatonics, you might say, 7-note scales, um, where we just tend to have a lot of musical content using those collections of notes. So let's check out one more. We're going to take a look at what's known as the octatonic scale. And we might think, well, how do you divide 12 by 8? Couple of things we could think about in that respect. We could say, well, the notes that we're not using, we have 4, right? So here we have 4 tones there, and then we have, you might say, 2 other groups of 4. So let's say diminished 7 arpeggio sitting right next to another diminished 7 arpeggio. So let's say C diminished 7, just like we had before. We're placing another diminished 7 a half step below it. And you could do the same process with above, but this is what we chose here. And so you could say, okay, it sort of falls into that 4 notes, 3 frets apart, and just two groups of them. But a lot of really kind of cool things to find in the octatonic scale. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more today, another day. But let's kind of check out the idea. If we go back to the whole tone scale and say, okay, every note had at least a half step on either side of them before getting to another note. So there's sort of a space of a fret at least. And then similar idea with the major scale. Have a note in between that we're not using. Okay. And then there's a tone that has maybe a whole step below it and then a half step above it. So there's going to be at least two notes that have a half step next to a note a half step away and a note a whole step away. So that's kind of interesting about the octatonic scale is kind of get the symmetry again, where we say okay, we have a whole step, but then a half step. So every note will have space of a whole step or a half step on either side of that particular note. So as an example, D has a note a whole step lower, and D has a half step higher. Right? So each note is going to fall into some category like that. So E flat will have a note a half step lower, and E flat will have a note a whole step higher. Right? So we get whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole. Okay. So then we're able to divide the octave up. Say root 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5. Right, and 5, flat 6, double flat 7, and major 7. All right, and then we can see that we have patterns that do repeat here. You know, so as we say, okay, say that. So I'm just moving a string over. Okay, and just doing 4 notes per string. Just kind of moving up, and then you can see how that pattern is going to basically repeat. You could also have some half steps here and see the half steps a whole step above that. So some really interesting patterns. It's interesting, sort of visually to, especially I think if you were to tune in all fourths or just look at this as like a bass guitar neck or something, and because it is a little bit harder to see with standard tuning, but the sort of the visually, the symmetry or the more often repeated pattern is maybe a little, in an aural sense, maybe a little more dissonant. So, but possibly more appealing to the eye. I don't know. Sort of. You'll have to let me know what you think about that. But there we have it. A few things. Let's just review everything and kind of take a look at some of those patterns. Remember, we're looking at this all from the perspective of the C octave shape. So there we have the tritone interval, the augmented triad, we have the diminished seventh, arpeggio, we have the pentatonic scale, we have the whole tone scale, the major scale, and we have the octatonic scale. So pretty interesting kind of thing. So you could take any one of these numbers, like the 7-note scales, and just think about the kind of beads on a string and try to move one of the beads over, one of the notes over. So, right. So I lowered this 7 to a flat 7. So then we could say, okay, well, that's kind of Mixolydian, all on one string. So doing that all on one string, I think, could be really helpful to narrow things down rather than conquering some of these larger patterns over all the strings. Although it's kind of necessary to do that, but just kind of get a sense for musically and theory-wise, So let's see. I'm going to call this providing. And I will place this on the community tab on YouTube. I'm going to check that out there. And checking this out on the podcast. Check out the website that linked in the description. And let's see, I will add all this to the community tab. And so I hope everybody has a great day. I'll be back with more videos tomorrow. And I'll see everybody in the next one. Have a great day, great practice session.